Hi everyone, this is Sal Munoz with All Chicago. This is a video in our basic data entry series. This video will cover how to document your client consent and how to create releases of information so that your client's consent is fully documented in the Homeless Management Information System, or as you know it, HMIS. Let's get started. So what we are going to be doing is documenting the client consent. Now, if you don't remember where to get this, or this is the first time you've ever seen this document, we have a training video on training webinar on what exactly is detailed in this client consent. It is 3 full pages that determine your client's willingness to share their data with other agencies so that they can be matched to housing through our coordinated entry system. So what we will be covering is when your client selects their options from part 2 of the client consent, right here on page 2, everything highlighted, and the dependents that your client allows you to have applied those data sharing options. And then part 3 is the portion that your client will be filling out if they have ever lived outside of the city of Chicago proper. So again, the city borders, not Chicagoland area, the city borders. And of course, we will also be covering the supplemental form right down here. So there will be a link in the description to download this document. Your agency should already be using this. This is the document that has gone into effect on May 1st, 2017. So if you are not using this, you are not in compliance. You must be using this document. Again, the link to this document will be in the description, and please download it and implement it as soon as possible. So here is my client. We are on the client summary page. So we will be going to the ROI tab. ROI in this case means release of information, and we see that the client currently has none. Now, we're going to assume that the client has already filled out the consent form. So let's go ahead and document what is on the consent form. At the end of this process, there may be up to 3 ROIs documented here. There will at least be 2. One of those will be covering what the level of data sharing that your client wants to engage in, and the second will be covering the supplemental form. Now, the contingent third one is whether or not your client has lived outside of the city of Chicago and whether or not they want to share that information with other suburban continuum of cares. So let's add the first release of information. So right up here, you will see that this is the household that is selected. This is a female child household with Margaret Simpson being the head of household and Bart Simpson being the child of the head of household. So on the client consent form, any dependents listed will be added to the household. So there is an option right over here for individuals with dependents to have that data sharing option applied to their entire household. So if your client checked this off, then you will be selecting the entire household. So with the entire household selected, now we can go ahead and enter the data. So for provider, for the most part, you will be leaving it at your agency level. Some larger providers may want to select a specific program, but for the most part, if you simply choose the agency level program, you will be fine for the most part. So with the provider selected, we will be moving down to start date. We'll be getting back to release granted, but let's start off with start date. So the start date will be whenever the client signed the information, signed the ROI. So let's say that they signed it on July 1st. So it'll be July 01, 2017. Now the end date. The system needs an end date. However, the consent form itself does not have an expiration date. The reason the system needs the end date is because this is simply a requirement that has been passed down. The system itself would not work if it did not have an end date. So for the most part, what we do is simply add 3 years to the start date. Well, the end date in this case will be July 1st, 2020. Now, in clicking documentation, we need to notice something in the way these are framed. So if you take a look, you'll see A through D, and then a supplemental form, and then a portion starting with part 3. Now A, B, C, and D are referring to the data sharing options. The options starting with supplemental are indicating the options from the supplemental form itself. And then part 3 is simply that third part at the end of the consent form. So with option A and C, the client's record does not have to be locked. However, if the client chooses options B and D, the client record will be locked. There's another video to show you how to lock a record, which will be in the description below. Let's say that Margaret has chosen option B, share basic and coordination of care and housing information as a locked file. Now, with release granted, coming right back up here, this is another passover from the system. The most important part to get documented is the documentation. However, for release granted, this is sort of contingent on whatever the documentation is. The best way to think of release granted is whether or not that client wants to share data with agencies outside of your own. So if they're comfortable knowing that their information is going to other social service agencies that isn't yours, then that release granted will be yes. Now for A through D, the only time release granted is no is if the client does not agree to share any information. For everything else, the client is agreeing to share information, except for D. So since we chose B, the release granted will be yes. Now the witness will be whatever agency representative signed the consent form. So if you remember, let's take a look right over here. Here's the client signature, and here's the agency witness signature. So whoever signed this, they will be the witness. So let's say it is Sal Munoz. There. Now we have documented the client data sharing options. Now we need 2 more. One for the supplemental form and one for part 3 if needed. So we'll select add release of information once more. And for the supplemental form, that's what we'll be documenting this time. For the supplemental form, you only need to select the head of household because they'll be the only person to fill this out. For the most part, the supplemental form does not apply to minors. It cannot be applied to several different people. It's per person for the supplemental form. So again, provider, we leave it just the same, your agency. The start date will be the date that they signed it. The end date will be the start date plus 3 years. And clicking documentation, we see these 3 options. Agrees to share disability information, does not agree to share disability information, client does not experience conditions listed. The best way to think about this is if the client has checked off any one of these boxes, they're going to share their information. If they checked off this box, they're indicating that they don't have a condition, which in turn sort of informs you on what their condition is, which is none. However, if they click here, That's them saying I'm not sharing whether or not I have any of these conditions at all. Let's say for Margaret, she does not experience conditions listed. We'll select that. But one thing to keep in mind when looking at release granted, since release granted is yes or no, if they agree to share disability information or even share that they don't have a disability, then that would be them saying, yes, I'm telling you my conditions or lack thereof. However, if they choose the middle option, where it does not agree to share disability information, in that case, release granted is no. So the middle option of supplemental, release granted would be no. But since our client does not experience the conditions listed, release granted is going to be yes. And again, Sal Munoz was the witness. So the trickiest part is documenting part 3. Now let's take a look at part 3 on the consent form. We could see that it is on the last page of this first part of the consent form, right here. Your consent to permit your information to be shared with other Illinois Continuum of Care groups. The client has to sign and check this box in order to have their consent to share documented in HMIS. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, this would only, again, still apply to the adult. So we leave this as it is. The provider will be the same agency, and release granted will be yes. If the client has signed and has checked off the box, then it's a yes. There's never a case where it'll be a no when they are sharing part 3. Now, if we go to documentation, there's only one option, which is just they agree to share information with other Illinois COCs. If they don't agree, then you don't even have to worry about this. There's no need to add a third ROI. But in this case, let's say that Margaret has lived outside of the city of Chicago in, let's say, suburban Cook. So we are going to document that. Again, we change the start date, and the end date will be 3 years from now. And the witness is the agency witness. So we're going to save the release of information. And there we go. We have fully documented the client's consent for data sharing, for supplemental information, and to share with other Illinois Continuum of Cares.